The gravel was the first thing she noticed. Not the towers, not the frozen fountain, not the stone cherub trapped mid-pour with nothing coming out. The gravel, raked into perfect lines, not a single stone out of place, as though the earth itself had been disciplined into submission. Eliza Vale stood at the end of the drive with her worn bag in one hand and a letter of introduction in the other, and she thought, a man who controls his gravel like this will be very difficult to work for. She walked up the drive anyway. She had no other choice. That was the thing about having no choices. You stopped being afraid of the ones that remained. She needed the position badly. Specifically, without pride, though pride was the one thing she seemed constitutionally unable to put down, no matter how many times life suggested she ought to. Her father's debts had taken the vicarage. Her sister Margaret was 18, pretty, and entirely unmarried, which in 1815 was a problem only money could solve. Her mother had taken to her bed the day the creditors arrived, and had not really gotten out of it since. Eliza was 24. She was the oldest. She was, therefore, the one standing on this raked gravel with cold feet, and no intention of letting any of that show on her face. She rang the bell. The housekeeper, Mrs. Hobbs, assessed her in under 10 seconds the coat, the boots, the face, and said only, "Lady Marin is expecting you." "I'll take you up." Lady Marin Ashworth was everything the agency had promised. Small, white-haired, dressed in black silk, with the hands of a woman who had once played piano seriously, and the eyes of a woman who had never once been fooled. She looked at Eliza the way Eliza had looked at the gravel, methodically, and with expectations of discipline. "You're the vicar's daughter," she said. "He's dead. And he left you nothing." "He left us considerable obligations," Eliza said. "Which amounts to the same thing." Lady Marin's eyes sharpened. Not with displeasure. With interest. "The last girl they sent cried when I asked her to read aloud. The one before reorganized my writing desk without permission. I came in one morning and couldn't find my own letters." She paused to let the horror settle. "Can you leave other people's things where they put them?" "I can." "Can you tell me when I'm being unreasonable without making a performance of it?" "I can tell you," Eliza said. "I can't promise what your response will be." A long pause. The fire crackled. "You'll do," Lady Marin said. She met the Duke that evening, and it was nothing. He came into the drawing room where Eliza was reading aloud Lady Marin's choice, a history of the Napoleonic campaigns, and he stopped when he saw her, the way people stop when they find unexpected furniture. Then he continued, as though the pause hadn't happened. "Aunt Julian, this is Miss Vale, my new companion." He looked at Eliza, brief, impersonal, the look of a man cataloging something he wouldn't need to refer to often. "Miss Vale, Your Grace." And that was it. He sat and spoke to his aunt about drainage problems in the eastern fields, and Eliza quietly became part of the furniture, which was exactly what the position required. She studied him anyway, because that is what quiet people do. He was younger than the portrait suggested. Lean, controlled, every line of him managed, his posture, his hands, the precise way he held his glass. He was, she thought, the human version of the gravel drive. He did not look at her again for the rest of the evening. She told herself this was perfectly fine. Lady Caroline Voss arrived on Friday, and the house changed, not loudly, but the way weather changes when you look up and realize the sky is a different color than it was an hour ago. She was tall, dark-haired, immaculately dressed, with the absolute confidence of a woman who had never once been asked to make do. She had been, by all quiet evidence, almost the Duchess of Marath for 3 years. The announcement had been expected season after season and had not come. At dinner she worked the table like a skilled driver handles a carriage, so smoothly you didn't notice the turns. She addressed Julian with familiarity that stopped just short of possession. She addressed Lady Marin with warmth that stopped just short of sincerity. She addressed Eliza once. "How lovely," she said, with a smile that had nothing behind it. "You must be Marin's new companion." "The agency one." "Yes," Eliza said. "How resourceful of you," Caroline said, and turned back to the table. Eliza picked up her fork. There was nothing to say. The comment was designed to be understood and impossible to object to, a particular skill, and one Eliza could recognize without admiring. She filed it away. She was good at filing things away. Later, she heard 2 housemaids in the corridor outside her room. Not eavesdropping, they were simply not quiet. Saw the way she looked at the companion. Lady Caroline looks at everyone that way. No, but she looked at her after she looked at him looking at her. He wasn't looking at her. He looked once. When she was reading. A pause. Once is enough with Lady Caroline. Eliza lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling. She had glanced up from Napoleon's campaigns at some point during the evening and found Julian Ashworth's eyes on her. She had looked back down immediately and kept reading without missing a word. She had told herself it was nothing. She was beginning to think she'd been a little hasty. The Saturday dinner party was the kind large cold houses threw in winter, an excuse for warmth and noise and company. Eliza sat slightly apart from Lady Marin, close enough to assist, far enough to be invisible. She was watching Julian, not for any reason she wanted to examine, only because he was at the head of the table and therefore unavoidable. When Caroline's voice lifted, pitched to carry exactly as far as intended. "Poor Marin does collect them, doesn't she?" she was saying to the woman on her left. "The vicar's daughter is here to empty chamber pots. Let's not confuse her function." The woman laughed. The small, polite laugh that means I'm not responsible for what I'm laughing at. Eliza did not move. She kept her face exactly as it was. Her hands in her lap were perfectly still. She had been humiliated before. She knew that the ones who do it in public are counting on your reaction, handing you a trap and calling it a comment. The only answer is to not step in it. She filed it away. In the drawer she kept for things she would not forget. She did not look at Julian to see if he had heard. The evening was almost over when Lady Marin's hand found Eliza's wrist. Not urgently. And then urgently. "I feel," she said and stopped, and her face did something wrong. In the next 10 seconds, Eliza caught her before she slid from her chair, called for Mrs. Hobbs across the room without raising her voice to panic pitch, loosened the top button of Lady Marin's collar, and told the nearest footman clearly, "Send for the doctor. Now please, not in a moment." The room erupted in the soft chaos of people who want to help and don't know how. Caroline stood and put a hand to her mouth and looked decorative. Between Eliza and Mrs. Hobbs, Lady Marin was on the settee in the next room within 2 minutes, color already returning, breathing steadying. Eliza was kneeling beside her, Lady Marin's hand in both of hers, not offering comforting nonsense, but actual information. "You're with us. Your color is better. The doctor is coming," when she became aware of someone in the doorway. Julian, standing very still, watching her with an expression she hadn't yet seen on his face. Not the catalog look. Not the controlled blankness of dinner. Something else, the particular unsettlement of a man who thought he knew the shape of a room and has just found an extra door. Their eyes met for 1 second. Then Eliza looked back at Lady Marin. She had work to do. The doctor came. Lady Marin was declared out of danger, her heart sending warnings it wasn't ready to make good on. She was to rest, not to be agitated, and absolutely not, Lady Marin informed him, to give up her evening sherry. The guests left. The house settled. Eliza sat with Lady Marin until she slept, then banked the fire and moved quietly to the door. Julian was in the corridor. He looked at his aunt sleeping, then at Eliza. "Is she?" "Well, sleeping." The doctor is confident. He nodded. "He didn't leave." "You kept your head," he said. "Someone had to, simply. Without modesty or performance. Just a fact." He looked at her a moment longer than necessary. "Good night, Miss Vale." "Good night, Your Grace." She went to her room. She sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. She told herself the warmth in her face was from the fire. She almost believed it. Lady Marin was a terrible patient. She submitted to bed rest for exactly 36 hours, 35 longer than anyone expected and 1 shorter than the doctor ordered, then appeared at the breakfast table in her black silk, poured her own tea, and dared anyone to comment. No one did. "The doctor said a week," Eliza said. "The doctor has not met me before." "He has. 3 times. Then he should know better by now." Eliza considered this. "Would you like toast?" "I would like toast, and for everyone to stop looking at me as though I'm made of old paper." She rang for toast. This was the rhythm of Lady Marin, difficult on the surface, and then underneath something warmer. Like a fire in a room with the curtains drawn. You didn't see the warmth until you were already inside. Eliza was beginning to trust it was there. Julian came every morning between 9 and 1/2 past, 20 minutes, a state business, efficient and complete. He did not linger. He did not make small talk. He was, in the purest sense, a man who was always somewhere for a reason. Eliza learned his habits the way she learned all useful things, quietly, without announcing she was doing it. Then it rained. Not politely, sideways, January bad, the kind that found every gap in every window frame. The morning room flooded. Julian canceled his ride and stayed indoors, which put him in a mood best left undisturbed. Lady Marin napped after lunch and told Eliza to go find something to read. "The library," she said, eyes already closing. "Julian won't be in it. He hates the library in the rain. Says it smells like the past." "Does it?" "Everything in this house smells like the past." "That's rather the point. Now go." The library smelled like the past. Also beeswax leather, and the cold that old rooms hold even when the rest of the house is warm. Eliza stood in the doorway and took it in, 4 walls of accumulated thought, other people's winters, ideas that had outlasted the people who'd had them. She found the natural sciences in the far corner. Pulled out a study of geological formations, illustrated, the kind of book that costs more than most people earn in a month, and sat by the window with the rain on the glass. She did not hear the door. That's the wrong shelf. She startled badly, nearly dropped the book and looked up. Julian was standing 4 feet away, hands clasped behind his back, with the expression of a man who'd walked into a room expecting it to be empty and wasn't sure of the etiquette now that it wasn't. "I beg your pardon," Eliza said, already half rising. "Sit down," he heard how it sounded. "Please." She sat. Lady Marin said you wouldn't be in here. She says a great many things. He moved to the shelves, pulled out a book without looking at the title. She's not always right. She's usually right. Yes. He sat in the chair across from her, full width of the rug between them, entirely proper. I find it useful not to tell her so. The rain came down. The fire crackled. Neither spoke. It was not uncomfortable, which was itself remarkable. Eliza had spent a month in rooms where silence needed to be managed, filled, shaped into something acceptable. This silence was different. It had no edges. She turned a page. He turned a page. Then you put the Herodotus back in the wrong place. She looked up. I reorganized. Chronologically. I know where my books are. Then you know where they are now. Chronologically. He looked up. Not the Duke face, something else. Faint, startled consideration, as though she'd done a small trick he hadn't expected. Put it back, he said, but it wasn't quite the command it sounded like. I'll consider it, she said, and looked back at her geological formations. The silence returned. Warmer than before. She didn't know how it started. Conversations rarely have a precise beginning, but somewhere in the next half hour they were talking. About the book, about the age of the earth, about the arguments it created with the church. Julian knew the subject well. And he talked about it differently than he talked at dinner, without performance, without management. Just direct, clear, occasionally sharp. She pushed back when she disagreed. She couldn't help it. A month of being invisible had apparently used up her supply of compliance. He didn't seem to mind. He seemed, in fact, to sharpen when she disagreed, like a man who had been having conversations that were too easy for too long. Then, in the middle of something else entirely, he said, "My brother believed in it. The old earth. The long timelines." The shift in his voice was slight. Just slight. But she caught it. Your brother. Thomas, he looked at the window. He was interested in everything. The sort of person who could make you interested in things you thought you weren't. A pause. He died at Waterloo. June of last year. I'm sorry, Eliza said. She didn't fill the space. No, he is with God. He died for something time heals. Just I'm sorry. And room for it to be true. He was 22, Julian said, and this time something underneath the smoothed-over surface showed through. He had notebooks full of questions he was going to look into after the war. Botany. Natural philosophy, a pause. He pressed flowers into the pages. He was a soldier and he pressed flowers. It sounds like he was a person, Eliza said. Fully. All at once. Julian was quiet. Yes, he said. That's exactly right. She let him look at the fire. After a moment she said, My father died 8 months ago. He had debts I didn't know about. I thought I knew him completely, and it turned out there was an entire room in him I'd never been in. That's difficult. It was. But I've stopped being angry at the room. He wasn't trying to deceive me. He just couldn't open it himself. Some people build rooms they can't open. Julian looked at her with that expression again. The one she didn't have a name for. That is either very forgiving, he said, or very wise. It's mostly just practical, she said. I don't have time to stay angry. There's too much else to do. He left 20 minutes later, correctly, without ceremony, with a nod that meant this happened, and I acknowledge it and nothing more. She stayed until the rain stopped. She thought about brothers who pressed flowers. About rooms no one could open. Then she put the Herodotus back where she'd found it. Not because he'd told her to. Because she decided to. There was a difference, and it felt important. Lady Manor was awake when she returned, a letter in her hand, and a look of satisfaction that Eliza was learning to read as something has happened that I predicted. "You smell of the library," she said. "I was in the library." So was Julian, I understand. He never goes in there in the rain. He said you told him you wouldn't be in there, Eliza said. He said he doesn't like it. He doesn't. Lady Manor set down her letter. But he went. Eliza picked up the shawl from the end of the bed and folded it and placed it on the chair. "The fire needs banking," she said. "The fire is perfectly adequate. Sit down, child." Eliza sat. "I'm going to tell you something," Lady Manor said. "And I want you to listen without making your practical face." "I don't have a practical face." "You have an extremely practical face." Set it aside for 30 seconds. She folded her hands. "Julian has not read in the library with anyone since Thomas died. He goes in alone, at night sometimes, and doesn't stay long. Today he stayed." A pause. "I'm not telling you what to do with that. I'm just telling you." Lady Manor. Practical face. "I see it." "Stop. I am employed here," Eliza said carefully. "I need £14 a month. My sister needs a future. I can't afford misunderstandings." Lady Manor looked at her for a long moment. "No," she said, and her voice was kind in a way it usually wasn't. "No, I don't suppose you can." She picked up her letter. The conversation was over. But at the door, Eliza paused. "He kept the notebooks," she said. "Thomas's. Julian's read them more than once, I think. He knew exactly what was in them." Lady Manor's expression did something complicated and private. "Good night, Miss Vale." "Good night, my lady." That Friday, Caroline returned. She swept in with her carriage and her trunks, and her smile deployed at full power. She greeted Julian with both hands extended. She greeted Lady Manor with warm words and cool eyes. She saw Eliza, and her gaze moved over her the way it always did, registering, categorizing, dismissing in under 2 seconds. And then she looked at Julian. Checking. A quick, precise read of his face, the way a navigator checks the compass. Not obviously, not urgently, but constantly. Whatever she found made her smile settle into something slightly different. Still warm. Still perfectly arranged. But calculating in a way that had not been there a moment before. Eliza added it to the drawer and closed it carefully. That evening, almost midnight, she heard Caroline's voice through the not-quite-closed door of Lady Manor's sitting room. "Only mentioning it because I care about the household's reputation." "Do you?" Lady Manor said. "The girl is making herself familiar. Always within his eyeline. Always with something useful to say. You make usefulness sound like a crime. I make presumption sound like what it is, still pleasant. Still warm. She's a paid companion. She's here to attend to you, not to make herself indispensable to the—" "Caroline," Lady Manor's voice quiet as a blade. "I have known you 4 years. I have watched you manage every person in this house like pieces on a board. You do it very well. But this is my house, and that girl is my companion, and you will leave her alone." A pause. "Of course," Caroline said. "I only wanted—" "Good night, Caroline." Footsteps light, deliberate, moving away. Eliza pressed herself against the wall until they faded. Then she stood in the dark corridor, her book against her chest, her heart doing something she told it firmly to stop. Lady Marin had defended her. She hadn't expected that. She hadn't expected to need it. She hadn't expected to feel it the way she did, like something that had been cold for a long time, suddenly, briefly, warm. She put on her practical face very deliberately, like armor, like good boots, like 14 pounds a month. He is a duke, she told herself. You are employed. You are here for Margaret. You are here for the spring. This is not a story. This is a job. She believed it. She believed enough of it to sleep. What she didn't know, couldn't know, was that down the corridor, Julian Ashworth was sitting at his desk with his correspondence untouched in front of him, thinking about geological formations and rooms that people couldn't open, and the particular quality of a silence that had no edges. He picked up his pen. He put it down. Stop it, he told himself, in the same voice he used for drainage problems and tenant disputes. He managed, eventually, to write 3 letters before he stopped thinking about her. 3 letters was not very many. He went to bed. In the morning, he went straight to the library. Second shelf far left. The Herodotus was back where it belonged. He stood there a moment, looking at it. Then, had any member of his household seen it, he smiled. Small. Private. Gone in a second. But real. The trap, like all good traps, was built slowly. Caroline did not rush. Rushing was for people who were uncertain. She spent the first 3 days of her extended stay being impeccable, warm to Lady Marin, attentive to Julian, pleasant to Eliza. That last one should have been the warning. After the corridor conversation Eliza hadn't been meant to hear, after the cool assessment and the dismissal, Caroline was pleasant. She said good morning. She remarked that Eliza had chosen a lovely piece to read aloud. She asked with apparent curiosity where Eliza had grown up. Eliza answered. She was polite. She kept her face correctly arranged. But she added it to the drawer. Because pleasantness from certain people was not a thaw. It was a reposition. She just didn't know yet to what end. Lord Fenwick arrived on Wednesday. He was about 40, with good clothes and the easy charm of someone who had spent a long time making first impressions and very little time on anything that came after. He laughed often. He touched people when he talked to them, an arm, a shoulder just briefly, just enough. Eliza disliked him immediately and told herself this was uncharitable. She watched him at dinner and revised. It was not uncharitable. It was accurate. She did not see Caroline speak to him privately. She had no reason to be watching for it. It happened, she would work out later, in the 20 minutes on Thursday morning when Lady Marin was with her doctor and Eliza had gone to the kitchen to collect the morning tray. 20 minutes. That was all it took to build a ruin. Thursday afternoon was bright, the first real winter brightness in days. Lady Marin wanted letters written, and Eliza spent an hour transcribing correspondence. Then Lady Marin wanted quiet, and Eliza collected the finished letters for the hall table. She was almost there when she realized she'd left Lady Marin's pen, silver-tipped, the only one she'd use for important correspondence, in the corridor study. She turned back. The study door sat slightly open. She pushed it further. Lord Fenwick was standing at the window. He turned, and his expression did something complicated, surprise, and then something calculated that moved through surprise too quickly to be real. Miss Vale. Just who I was hoping to see. I beg your pardon, she reached for the pen. I only came for. Stay a moment. He moved not quickly, not threateningly, but deliberately between her and the door. "I've been hoping to speak with you alone." "I'm not difficult to find," Eliza said, pen in hand. "I'm simply usually with Lady Marin. If you'll excuse me." "She doesn't appreciate you. A woman like you, intelligent, capable, wasted as a companion." "I find it quite suitable, thank you." She moved toward the door. He didn't move out of the way. Not aggressively. Not in a way that could be named. Just not quite moving, so that the space between her and the door was his space now. "I have connections," he said. "I know people looking for companions of a different sort. Better paid. I could speak on your behalf." "Lord Fenwick." Her voice was very quiet and very clear. "Move away from the door, please." He smiled. "I only meant—" "I know exactly what you meant. Move away from the door." "A beat." He stepped back, hands raised slightly, still smiling. The smile of a man who files things under later rather than no. She walked past him. She did not hurry. She would not hurry. She was 4 steps into the corridor when she heard another door open, the one at the end, and footsteps, and she turned, and Julian was there. He had come in from outside, still in his riding coat, taking the corridor shortcut to his study. This was, she would work out later, exactly what Caroline had counted on. Julian stopped. He looked at the study door, standing open. He looked at Fenwick in the doorway. He looked at Eliza, standing in the corridor, pen in hand. She saw the moment he assembled the picture. She saw the picture he assembled. It was the wrong one. "Your Grace," she said immediately. "I came for Lady Marin's pen." Lord Fenwick was. "Julian." Fenwick spoke over her smoothly, easily, the way men do when they know the room will let them. "I was just keeping Miss Vale company." She seemed at a loose end. "I was not at a loose end," Eliza said. "I was retrieving." "Miss Vale," Julian's voice. Flat and careful, and she heard it snap shut behind his eyes. "Something going cold." "Your Grace, please, if I could just explain." "That will do," he said. He looked at Fenwick. Said his name once, in a tone that said everything and nothing. Then he walked away, and his study door closed, and the house was quiet. Eliza stood in the corridor. Then she looked at Fenwick. He was examining his cufflinks. Not meeting her eyes. But she saw the corner of his mouth, just briefly, before he arranged his face into bland innocence. "I'm sorry if I've caused any trouble," he said pleasantly. She turned and walked away. Her hands were perfectly steady. She was proud of that later. Julian called her to his study at 6 o'clock. Mrs. Hobbs came to find her formally, correctly, which was itself a message. Eliza set down her book. She smoothed her dress. She put on her practical face, every piece of it, so there was nothing showing that could be used. He was standing behind his desk, which meant he was not going to invite her to sit, which meant this was already decided. "I'll come directly to the point," he said. "Please do." "I was made aware, not only by what I saw this afternoon, but by other members of the household, that your conduct has been irregular." "Other members of the household," she repeated. "That's not relevant." "I think it is." She kept her voice steady. "It cost her something." "What was I seen doing?" "Specifically?" "Because what you saw this afternoon was me retrieving a pen. Lord Fenwick was there when I arrived. He positioned himself between me and the door, which I found disagreeable. That is what happened." Julian looked at her. She watched him want to believe her. She watched him not quite let himself. Lord Fenwick is a peer of the realm, he said. He has no reason to. He has every reason, she said, and her voice did the sharp thing she couldn't stop. He is a man who sees women in reduced circumstances as available. I am not the first he has done this to. That is a serious accusation. I know what I'm saying. He came around the desk. Not toward her, he stopped, arms at his sides, and she saw just briefly that he was not as composed as he looked. That underneath the Duke there was a man doing something very difficult. I cannot run a household on what things look like, he said. I have a responsibility to this house, to its reputation, to my aunt who trusted. I know what I was trusted to do, she said. I did it. I have done nothing else. I cannot verify that. The words landed like something physical. She looked at him. He looked back. No, she said after a moment. I suppose you can't. She watched him make the decision. Watched it move across his face, the closing of something that had been, briefly, open. I think it would be best if you were to leave. I will provide a month's wages and a reference. No. He stopped. I don't want your wages. I have done nothing wrong. I will not take money as though I have. Her voice was very quiet now, which was a different kind of sharp. I will leave. Because I cannot stay where I am not believed. But I will not take your wages. He said nothing. She turned to go. And because she couldn't help it, because she had sat in the library with him and heard about Thomas and the pressed flowers and had thought, in the weak, foolish part of herself, she was already disciplining back into silence, that he saw her, she turned back. I expected better from you, she said. I don't know why. I had no right to expect anything. She left before he could answer. Lady Marin's reaction was immediate and volcanic. You overruled me, she said when Julian came to tell her himself, which was the only decent thing he'd done in the last hour. It is my household. She is my companion. Aunt. Don't aunt me. Her eyes were sharp and furious, and underneath something hurt. That girl has done nothing. You know it and I know it, and the only person in this house who has done something is that snake in good silk, who engineered this entire. There is no evidence. Julian, quiet suddenly. Quieter than he'd heard in years. I am 71 years old. I have watched people manage each other in drawing rooms for 50 of those years. I know what this looks like. I cannot run a household on what things look like. No, she said. You run it on what you decide. And you've decided. She looked at him the way she had when he was 12 and had done something he couldn't undo. I hope you're right. She turned her face to the window. He stood there a moment longer. Then he left. Eliza packed in 40 minutes. She was good at packing. You became good at it when you'd moved a family out of a vicarage in a week. She kept what was hers, left what wasn't. She held the geological formations book for 3 minutes. She set it on the desk. It was not hers. A maid came for the bag, Mary, who had always been kind in the small ways that staff are kind when they've decided they like someone. Her face was miserable in the way of someone who knows something wrong is happening and has no power to say so. I'm sorry, miss, she said. We all think. She stopped. Discretion reasserting itself. I know, Eliza said. Thank you. She spent the evening in her room. She wrote to Margaret. Dear Meg, I am moving on from Ashworth Manor. The position did not suit in the end. Don't worry. She did not say, I have been accused of something I did not do. She did not say, I thought someone saw me and I was wrong. She said, don't worry. She signed her name. She folded it. She was dressed and ready by 6, an hour before the cart. She sat on the edge of the made bed and waited. At 6:30, footsteps in the corridor stopped at her door. She held very still. They didn't knock. After a moment, they moved away. She told herself it was one of the maids. She almost believed it. The cart driver was a man of 60 who smelled of horses and morning cold, and who, after one look at her face, attempted no conversation. She climbed up and looked straight ahead. She did not look back at the house. She had almost reached the end of the drive when she heard the front door open. And then, after a moment, close. She kept her eyes on the road. That was when she noticed her feet were wrong cold. Whetstone cold. Too thin cold. She looked down. Her boots, thick-soled, resolute, cleaned every Sunday for 4 years, were not on her feet. Her bag had been packed in the chaos of last night, and someone had not included them, and she was wearing her soft leather indoor shoes, already darkening at the toe from the damp of the gravel. She looked at her feet for a long moment. Then she looked at the road. 4 miles to the village. Frost hard. January gray. She breathed in once, very deliberately. "Could you drive to the village?" she asked the driver. He said, not looking at her. "That's where I'm going." She folded her hands in her lap. Behind her, getting smaller and then gone, was Ashworth Manor and its perfect gravel and its frozen cherub and its library full of books and its duke standing at his study window. Though she didn't know about the window, watching a woman in indoor shoes disappear down his drive. She knew only the road and the cold and the 4 miles ahead. She did not look back. In the drawing room, Lady Caroline Voss stood at the mirror and smoothed one perfect glove over the other. Lady Marin's voice came from the doorway, quiet as a blade. "I want you to know that I have lived long enough to know exactly what you did." Caroline turned. "Marin, you used this household as a stage, and a decent girl as a prop, and my nephew as a puppet. Because you were afraid." A pause. "Because he read with her in the library. Because he stayed." "Good morning, Caroline." She walked out. Caroline turned back to the mirror. Her reflection looked back perfect, unruffled, correctly arranged. She smoothed the second glove again, very carefully. Her hand was almost perfectly steady. Almost. The first mile was anger. Pure, clean anger, the kind that keeps you warm, that puts iron in your spine and stops you from feeling the cold coming up through thin leather soles. Eliza walked and she was furious, and the fury was useful. It burned steady and hot, and it kept her moving. She catalogued it as she walked. The corridor. Fenwick's smile. The way Julian's face had closed like a door. "I cannot verify that." 4 words. That was all it had taken. 4 words to undo a month of careful, honest work. A picture painted for him, framed for him, hung on his wall so that when he walked in the light was already arranged to make it look like truth. She thought about who had arranged the light. She thought about Caroline's gloves, folded in her hands. The stillness of her on the staircase that first dinner, watching, perfectly still. You didn't stand still like that unless you already knew what was coming. The second mile was calculation. She had 11 shillings and 4pence. A letter of reference from the London agency. Her original one, before Ashworth, good but not recent. No letter from this position, having refused the wages that would have come with one. Pride, she thought, is a very expensive garment. She thought about Margaret. About her mother, who required warmth and quiet and the specific chamomile tea that cost 3 shillings a packet. About the vicarage stripped bare now. She thought about her father's face, kind, weak, secretly terrified, and she could not be angry at him still even now. He had built a room he couldn't open, and eventually the room had opened itself, and she was walking through the consequences in inappropriate shoes. But she could not be angry at him. She could be angry at Julian Ashworth, though. She found she was still doing that. The 3rd mile was just cold. The anger burned through and left her hollow, and the cold came in where it had been, up through her soles, into her ankles. Her breath came in clouds. There was no one else on the road, which was fine because she didn't want a face she'd have to arrange herself for. She thought about the library, the rain, the silence that had no edges. He had no right to trust me, she thought. I had no right to expect it. We had spoken 3 times. I am staff. Her left foot went into a puddle disguised by a skin of ice. The cold water came in immediately, completely, with no mercy whatsoever. Eliza stopped, looked down at her soaked shoe, stood there in the middle of the empty road. And then, because she was alone and there was no one to see and she had been holding it since the study, she pressed her lips together very hard, and her eyes went bright, and she stood there for exactly 30 seconds. 30 seconds. Then she breathed in. She breathed out. She picked up her bag and walked. The village of Ashworth Cross was 4 miles from the manor, and considerably less impressive. It had a church, a blacksmith, a shop, and an inn called the Manor that had been standing since before anyone could remember and showed it. It was, however, warm. The innkeeper's wife was called Mrs. Dove, which suited her, roundness and warmth and a brisk practicality that did not exclude kindness. She looked at Eliza. She looked at Eliza's feet. "Come in," she said, "before you lose the toes." Eliza had not intended to say anything. She'd intended to pay for a room, write her letters, eat as little as possible, and be methodical. But Mrs. Dove sat her down by the kitchen fire, not the parlor. The kitchen, warm and real, brought her a bowl of something thick and good, and produced dry socks from a drawer with the efficiency of a woman who considered wet feet a practical problem requiring a practical solution. While Eliza was pulling them on, Mrs. Dove put a mug of tea on the table and said, without making it a question, "Ashworth Manor." Eliza looked up. "Your bag. Your shoes. The direction you came from." She sat across the table. "I don't need the details. It's none of my business." "Thank you," Eliza said. "I've had 3 girls from that house walk that road in the last 4 years. 2 of them were crying. You weren't." "I did cry," Eliza said with scrupulous honesty. "Briefly. In mile 3. Mrs. Dove nodded approvingly. "Mile 3 is the right place for it. Too early and you run out of energy. Too late and you've gone numb." Eliza looked at her. And then, to her complete surprise, she laughed. Just briefly, just a short surprised sound. But real. Entirely real. The first real thing she had felt since the study. "Can I take a room?" she asked. "Already made up, Mrs. Dove said. "Eat your soup." She wrote to Margaret. To the London agency. To a school in the next county, teacher wanted, £12 per annum, less than the companion position but enough if she was careful. She was always careful. She sealed the letters and lay down on the bed in her dress, because it was cold, and she hadn't brought a spare blanket and she was not going to ask Mrs. Dove for one. She stared at the ceiling. She thought about the pressed flowers. She stopped thinking about the pressed flowers. She thought about them anyway. He had no right, she told herself. And neither did you. The ceiling had a water stain in the shape of nothing particular. She looked at it until she slept. In the morning, Mrs. Dove made porridge and did not charge her for it. She sat across from Eliza with her own bowl and said, in the comfortable tone of someone reporting the weather, "Lord Fenwick came through here last autumn." Eliza looked up. "Stopped 2 nights. Very charming. The kind of charming that makes you want to count your silver after." She stirred her porridge. "My niece Susanna helps in the kitchen. 19. Pretty." He paid her particular attention. "I put a stop to it. But I heard afterward from the innkeeper at Tetbury, 20 miles north, that he hadn't been so lucky there. A girl called Harris. The solicitor's daughter." "What happened?" "What usually happens, Mrs. Dove said, when a man like that pays particular attention to a girl with no one to protect her." A pause. "She's gone to a relative in Scotland. The family doesn't discuss it." Eliza set down her spoon. "He's known for it, Mrs. Dove continued. "In this county and the next. Innkeepers know. Solicitors' clerks know. Mothers of daughters know." She looked at Eliza directly. "Dukes apparently don't." "Or don't ask," Eliza said. "Or don't ask." Something cold and clarifying moved through her. He should have known. He had the resources, the connections, the staff. He had chosen, instead, to believe a picture. And this was what had kept her awake looking at the water stain. It was a very well-made picture. And Julian Ashworth had not had anyone stage a picture for him before. He was managing a dukedom and a dead brother's notebooks, alone, and Caroline had been there for years. Reliable, known, and Eliza had been there for a month. He made a mistake, she thought. A serious one. And then, because she was Eliza Vale, what am I going to do about it? The answer came piece by piece, the way right answers do. First, she needed evidence. What Mrs. Dove knew was a beginning, a name, a pattern, a history that could be documented. Second, she needed to be believed. Not by the county. By one specific person who had chosen not to hear her. Third, she was going to need to go back. The thought sat in her chest, unwelcome and obvious. Not because she wanted the position. Not because she had any right to expect anything from Julian Ashworth. But because she had done nothing wrong and she had said so, and she had not been believed, and that was a thing she could not leave to stand. Her father had built rooms he couldn't open. Her mother had gone to bed and stayed there. Eliza Vale was not built that way. She asked Mrs. Dove about the innkeeper in Tetbury. Graves, Mrs. Dove said. He saw Fenwick with the Harris girl. Said something afterward, but no one to say it to. A pause. He'd say it to the right person. And Susanna. Susanna would speak. She's angry enough. Mrs. Dove looked at her steadily. The look of a woman who has already decided to help and is just waiting for the asking. My husband goes to Tetbury on Saturdays, she said. That's tomorrow. He could use company on the box. Graves was a tall, spare man who listened to Eliza's careful questions with his arms folded and his eyes steady, and when she finished he said, "About time someone asked." He couldn't write well himself. But he could speak, and Eliza could write, and between them they produced 3 pages, plain, detailed, describing what Graves had seen and heard and knew of Lord Fenwick's conduct across 2 counties and at least 4 young women. He signed it. He pressed his seal. Eliza folded it and put it in her coat. She thought about going back. About what it would cost her. About Julian at his study window. She didn't know he had been there, but she felt it, the weight of something that had happened behind her back. I am going back for the truth, she told herself. That is all. She believed approximately 60% of it. She was helping Mrs. Dove bring in the washing frozen stiff on the line, sheets standing up by themselves, which was oddly satisfying when the horse appeared. It came around the corner of the inn from the direction of the road, reins trailing, entirely unbothered. A good horse, dark bay, well-fed, well-shod, moving with the easy confidence of an animal that has always been well-treated and knows it. It walked into the yard and stopped at the water trough and began to drink. The stable boy appeared from the stable door. That horse has come loose from somewhere. Look at the brand. On the horse's flank, clearly marked, a stylized A with a coronet above. Ashworth. Eliza looked at the horse for a long moment. The horse finished drinking and looked back at her with the calm, dark eye of an animal that has made a decision and is comfortable with it. Mrs. Dove said slowly, well. She's not saddle shy, the stable boy said. I can tell from here. Mrs. Dove looked at Eliza. You can ride, she said. Not quite a question. My father kept 2 horses, Eliza said. Before. Mrs. Dove said nothing else. Because Mrs. Dove was a woman who understood that some moments did not require commentary. Eliza looked at the document in her pocket. She looked at the horse. She looked at the road going north, which was also the road to Ashworth Manor, which was the same 4 miles she had walked 2 days ago in the frost. This is not a sign, she thought. This is a coincidence. She handed her end of the frozen sheet to the stable boy. I'll need a saddle, she said. Mrs. Dove smiled. Just slightly. The smile of a woman who had sorted this situation into its correct category some time ago. Jim, she said. Fetch the lady a saddle. She left at first light Sunday morning. Good coat. Hair correctly pinned. The document in her breast pocket next to her heart, which she noted without comment. She had paid Mrs. Dove for 2 nights and the meals, and tried to pay for the socks. Mrs. Dove refused with the finality of a woman who has rules about wool. Come back and tell me how it goes, she said at the gate. I will, Eliza said. She rode out with her back straight and the Ashworth horse moving well beneath her, steady, warm, entirely certain of itself, which was more than she was, and the winter fields opening wide and gray and cold on either side. She did not look behind her. She looked at the road ahead. 4 miles. The same 4 miles reversed. Except this time she was not walking. She came up the drive at a trot. The front drive. Main entrance. The raked gravel, the frozen cherub, the rows of windows catching the morning light. She rode up it on the Duke's own horse, and she did not slow down. Word spread through the house in 4 minutes. She believed it later. The sight of the dismissed companion returning on the Duke's missing bay gelding via the front drive on a Sunday morning was, by any measure, worth moving quickly for. She brought the horse to a halt at the front steps. Dismounted cleanly, without assistance. Tied the reins to the iron ring beside the door, probably meant for visiting nobility, not for wrongfully dismissed companions making a point, but available, so she used it. She knocked. Harding the butler opened the door. A man of immense composure, 20 years in this house. Something moved across his face as he took in the horse, the drive, Eliza on the step with her back straight. Miss Vale, he said. Good morning, Harding, she said. "I would like to see Lady Manor, please." He stepped back. He let her in. She walked through the front door, and her indoor shoes clicked on the polished hall floor and somewhere above her. On the landing, she heard footsteps stop. She did not look up. Not yet. She had something to do first. She heard him before she reached Lady Maron's corridor. Footsteps behind her, not hurrying but present. Deliberate. The footsteps she had learned in a month and had not forgotten in 3 days, which was irritating and beside the point. She kept walking. "Miss Vale." She stopped. She did not turn. "Miss Vale," his voice was different. Not the Duke voice. The other one, the one from the library. "Would you?" She turned. He was standing 10 feet away, and he looked. She would not let herself think about how he looked. She looked at his face because she needed to know, before she said anything, whether this was the Duke or the man. It was the man. He looked like someone who had slept very badly for 3 nights and had been honest with himself about why. She reached into her breast pocket, took out the document, 3 pages, folded, Graves's seal on the outside. She walked to him and held it out. He took it, looked at it, then at her. "What is this?" "Evidence," she said. "What you said you needed." She turned and walked toward Lady Maron's room. She did not look back, but she heard the rustle of paper. She heard him begin to read. Lady Maron looked up from her chair. She looked at Eliza, all of her, from the indoor shoes to the wind-loosened hair to the thing in her face that was not quite triumph and not quite uncertainty, but somewhere between the two. "You came back," she said quietly. "I came back. On his horse. His horse came to me." A pause. Lady Maron's mouth did something that, on a less severe woman, would have been called a grin. "Sit down, child," she said, "and tell me everything." Eliza told her. All of it, Mrs. Dove, the porridge, Graves and Tetbury, the 3 pages, the seal. Lady Maron listened without interrupting, which was unusual. When Eliza finished, the old woman was quiet for a long moment, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes on the fire. "Fenwick," she said finally, "I knew there was something wrong with that man. He laughs too easily." "He does," Eliza agreed. "And Caroline knew his history. The document suggests they have known each other some time." Lady Maron's jaw set. "Of course she did." She looked at Eliza. "Julian is reading it now." "He was when I left him in the corridor." "Good." A pause. "He didn't sleep. In case you were wondering. Mrs. Hobbs told me he was in his study until past 2, 3 nights running. I'm not telling you that for any particular reason." "I understand," Eliza said. "I'm simply reporting facts." "Of course." Lady Maron looked at her with sharp, fond eyes. "You are extremely irritating, you know. With your practical face." "So I've been told," Eliza said. Julian read the document twice. He stood in the corridor where she had left him, and he read every word, and with every page something shifted in his chest. Slow, grinding, the way ice shifts when the temperature finally changes. Fenwick. 4 women. 2 counties. A history so thoroughly documented that the only question was how a man like that had continued to move through drawing rooms and dining tables without consequence. The answer, of course, was that men like that always did. Until someone wrote it down and pressed a seal to it and put it in the hands of the right person. He thought about Eliza in the study corridor, pen in hand, face steady, saying, "I know exactly what you meant." He thought about her voice in his study. I expected better from you, and the way she had left before he could answer, which was the only merciful thing about that entire conversation. He thought about the window. He had stood at that window for a long time. He folded the document. He put it in his coat. He went to find Caroline. She was in the morning room, the one that faced east, flooded with pale light until noon. She was writing a letter, which she set down when he came in, composing her face into something warm and slightly concerned, the way she always did, the way she was very good at. He closed the door. He did not sit. I want to talk about Lord Fenwick, he said. Something moved across her face. Too quick to catch, too slow to hide entirely. She had not expected the document. She had not expected Eliza to come back at all, certainly not on his horse, certainly not with evidence. Julian, how long have you known him? We have several acquaintances in common, How long, he said, have you known about his conduct? The warmth in her face did something complicated. She tried the concerned expression. She tried the puzzled one. She even tried, briefly, the wounded one. He waded through all of them. I was protecting you, she said finally. Protecting this household. The girl was making herself. Her name is Miss Vale. Making herself familiar in a way that was inappropriate, and you were too. She paused, selected her word carefully, distracted to see it clearly. I see it clearly now, he said. The room was very quiet. Caroline looked at him, really looked, for the first time since he'd walked in, past the management and the performance. She looked at his face and she read it, the way she was skilled at reading things, and whatever she found there made her sit very still. She is a vicar's daughter with 11 shillings, Caroline said. Her voice had lost its warmth. What was underneath was harder and more honest, and in its way more interesting. You are the Duke of Marath. You have spent 10 years rebuilding everything your father destroyed. You would throw that away for. I'm not throwing anything away, he said. I am correcting a mistake. Julian, you used this house, he said, as a stage. You used a decent woman as a prop. You used me as, he stopped. I think you should leave, Caroline. She looked at him a long moment. Then she stood, smoothed her dress, and picked up her unfinished letter with a composure that was, he had to admit, extraordinary. You are making, she said quietly, a very foolish decision. Probably, he said. It's mine to make. She left. The morning room was very bright and very empty. He stood in it for a moment, and then Lady Marin's voice came clearly through the wall. She had always chosen her rooms for acoustics. Intentionally, he was almost certain, saying, well. That took longer than it should have. He closed his eyes briefly. Then he went to find Eliza. She was in the corridor outside Lady Marin's room, which is where Lady Marin had sent her, firmly, specifically, with the instruction to go and stand somewhere Julian will find you without having to search, because men like him will talk themselves out of it if given enough time and corridor. Eliza had pointed out that this was manipulation. Lady Marin had said, yes. And your point. So she was standing in the corridor, which felt undignified when she heard his footsteps. She considered walking away. Then she considered that she had ridden 4 miles on his horse and walked into his house through the front door and handed him 3 pages of documented evidence, and that after all of that, standing in a corridor waiting for him to find her was perhaps not her most undignified moment. He came around the corner and stopped. They looked at each other. Caroline is leaving, he said. I heard, she said. The walls in this house were not as thick as they appeared. The document, he began. I know what the document says. Miss Vale, he stopped. Started again. Eliza. First time. Her name in his voice. She had not prepared for that particular thing, and it showed just briefly, before she recovered. You were right, he said. I chose a picture over a person. I chose the comfortable assumption over the actual evidence in front of me, which was you telling me the truth in my own study. He held her gaze. I sent you away without. He looked down. At her feet. At the indoor shoes, still slightly darkened at the toe from 4 miles of January road. Something moved across his face that she had no word for. Without shoes, he said quietly. It was an oversight, she said. In the packing. It was not an oversight. They both knew what it had been. I owe you an apology, he said. A real one. Not a letter, not a month's wages. I owe you, he stopped again, and she could see it cost him something, this man who managed everything, to stand in a corridor and not manage this. I don't quite know how to do this, he admitted. I am better at decisions than apologies. I know, she said. I'm attempting one regardless. I can see that. A pause. How am I doing? He asked. And there it was, that thing she had seen in the library, the man underneath the Duke, just briefly, just enough. Considerably better than the letter, she said. Something shifted in his face. You haven't read the letter. No, she said. But I know you wrote one. Lady Marin is not subtle. Lady Marin, he said with feeling, is the least subtle person in England. She's in the next room, Eliza said. I know, he said. She wants me to know she's in the next room. They stood there and the corridor was quiet, and it was not uncomfortable. It had that quality again, the one she had first noticed in the library. No edges. I would like you to stay, he said. Not as a companion. Not as staff, he stopped. I don't quite have the right to ask what I want to ask. Not yet. But I would like, if you were willing, to have the time to earn that right. She looked at him. This careful, controlled, complicated man, who read his dead brother's notebooks and checked the library shelves, and had stood at a window long after she was gone. You'll have to do considerably better than a corridor, she said. I'm aware. And the shoes, she said. Someone will need to account for the shoes. I will personally account for the shoes, he said, with a gravity that was entirely serious and also just slightly not. Whatever that requires. From the next room, entirely audible, Lady Marin said, For the love of God, Julian, just ask her to stay. He closed his eyes. Eliza pressed her lips together very hard. Would you, he said with great dignity, be willing to stay? At Ashworth. As someone I would very much like to argue with, going forward if you'll permit it. She looked at him for a long moment. I permit it, she said. She permits it, Lady Marin announced, to no one in particular at full volume. Finally, I'll have Mrs. Hobbs make up the good room. Caroline's carriage left at 2 o'clock. The staff watched from various windows. Nobody was sad. Lord Fenwick's name, meanwhile, was already moving through the right channels, quietly, methodically, the way Julian did everything. Certain doors would begin to close. Certain invitations would not arrive. It would take time, but it would be thorough. That evening, Eliza sat with Lady Marin, while Julian dealt with correspondence, which was apparently never-ending regardless of what happened in his corridors. You know, Lady Marin said, from behind her needlework, I predicted all of this. I know you did. From the first day. When you told me you couldn't promise what my response would be, she pulled her thread through. That was the moment. The moment for what? The moment I knew you'd be good for him. A pause. He needs someone who doesn't promise things she can't deliver. Everyone else in his life has always told him what he wanted to hear. Eliza was quiet. He told me about Thomas, she said after a moment. In the library. The first day it rained. Lady Marin's needle stopped. He doesn't talk about Thomas, she said. I know. The fire crackled. Outside, the January dark had settled fully over the grounds, and somewhere in the house a clock struck 8, and Ashworth Manor was warm and still and exactly as it should be. Go to bed, child, Lady Marin said softly. It's been rather a long week. It had been rather a long week. Eliza went to bed. She lay in the dark, not her small room facing the thorns, but the good room, the one Mrs. Hobbs had made up with extra blankets and a fire already lit, and she looked at the ceiling, which had no water stain, and she thought about nothing in particular. She thought about 4 miles of January road and dry socks and porridge that didn't cost anything, and a horse that had walked into a yard, and looked at her like a decision already made. She thought about a man in a corridor, doing something difficult badly and being honest about it. She thought, this is not a story. And then, because she was Eliza Vale and constitutionally unable to lie to herself for very long, it might be a story. She closed her eyes. She slept. The document did its work quietly. Julian sent copies to 3 people: his solicitor, a magistrate he trusted, and a man in London whose particular skill was making things known in the right rooms without making them public in the wrong ones. He did this within 48 hours of reading Graves's testimony, which was fast even for him. He did not tell Eliza. She found out from Lady Marin, who found out from Mrs. Hobbs, who found out from the footman who had carried the sealed letters to the post. He moves quickly, Lady Marin said with satisfaction, when he's decided. He does, Eliza agreed. He decided some time ago, incidentally. About you. Before the document, before Caroline, before any of it, she turned a page. He just needed the floor to stop moving under him. Lady Marin. Practical face. I see it. Never mind. Lord Fenwick lasted 2 weeks before the doors began to close. It happened the way Julian had designed it, quietly, without spectacle. An invitation not extended. A club membership suddenly under review. A gentleman's agreement, spoken at a dinner table in London, that Lord Fenwick's name would not appear on certain guest lists going forward. No scandal in the papers. No public accusation. Just the steady, methodical withdrawal of access, which for a man like Fenwick was its own kind of ruin. The girl in Scotland, the Harris girl, would never know. But the girl in the kitchen in Ashworth Cross, Mrs. Dove's niece Susanna, heard about it eventually and came to find Mrs. Dove in her kitchen and stood there for a moment not saying anything. Then she said, "Good, Mrs." Dove made her a cup of tea. "Good," she said too. Caroline's letter arrived on a Thursday. It was addressed to Julian, 3 pages long, and Eliza did not read it because it was not hers to read. But she saw his face after he had, and she asked nothing, because some rooms were not hers to enter uninvited. He came to find her in the library that afternoon. She was reading, actually reading this time, not performing readiness to be invisible, and she looked up when he came in, and he sat in the chair across from her, the one he always sat in, and he said, "Caroline writes that I am throwing away everything I spent 10 years building." "What do you think?" Eliza said. He was quiet for a moment. I think I spent 10 years building the wrong things. She looked at him. Or rather, he said, I built the right things for the wrong reasons. The reputation, the discipline, the managed efficiency of all of it. It was never about the dukedom. It was about Thomas. Thomas, she said carefully. He was supposed to come home, Julian said. And then he didn't. And the estate was in pieces, and my father had left nothing but debts and scandal, and I thought, if I make it perfect, if I make it exactly right, it will mean something. That he died for something worth leaving behind. A pause. It's not very logical. It's very logical, Eliza said. It's just not the only logic available. He looked at her. You do that, he said. Do what? Find the thing underneath the thing. He said it without complaint. Simply, as though reporting something he had noticed. You've been doing it since the library. Since the library, she agreed. You told me about the pressed flowers, and I thought, he knows exactly what's in those notebooks because he's read them. More than once. Every winter, he said. Since Waterloo. The fire was going. The rain that had started around noon was steady against the windows. Outside, the rose garden was nothing but thorns, but somewhere under the frost, the roots were doing their patient work. He would have liked you, Julian said. Thomas. He liked people who argued back. Most people with notebooks full of questions do, she said. He smiled. Not the small private one she'd seen that morning with the Herodotus. A real one, present and unhidden, and it changed his face entirely. She looked back at her book before he could see what it did to hers. The question of Eliza's position in the household had become, by the third week, a source of considerable interest below stairs. She was not Lady Marin's companion, not really, not anymore, though she still read aloud and poured tea and managed the correspondence. She was not a guest, though she sat at the dinner table now when it was just the three of them, which was most evenings. She was not yet anything else though Mrs. Hobbs had begun, quietly, to put flowers in her room on Fridays, and the cook had learned how she took her tea. The staff had their own views. They kept them largely to themselves, but they were warm views by all evidence. Harding, the butler, said nothing to anyone. But on the morning that Eliza came downstairs to find her worn leather bag, the one she had carried up the drive on her first day, replaced in her room by a new one, good leather, unmonogrammed, practical, with no note attached, he met her eyes in the hallway with an expression of utter professional neutrality. "Good morning, Miss Vale," he said. "Good morning, Harding," she said. Neither of them mentioned the bag. She thought about the shoes. Julian asked her to walk with him on a Tuesday afternoon when the frost had lifted enough to make the grounds bearable, and they walked the edge of the east field where the drainage problem had been. Solved. Now, efficiently, as everything in his management of the estate was eventually solved, and he told her about his plans for the spring planting, and she told him what her father had done with the vicarage garden. And they argued about crop rotation with an intensity that would have seemed peculiar to anyone observing and felt, to both of them, entirely natural. At the edge of the field he stopped. "I want to ask you something," he said. "All right," she said. "Your sister, Margaret." She looked at him. "What about her? You've been sending money home. I know because you asked Mrs. Hobbs about the post schedule in your first week, and you've used it every month since." He was looking at the field, not at her. "I want to know if she is all right." "She is," Eliza said carefully. Managing is not the same as all right." "No," she agreed. "It isn't." Lady Marin, he said, has been corresponding with a Mrs. Hale in Bath, who runs what I understand to be a very well-regarded establishment for young women of good family in reduced circumstances. It provides both housing and introductions to suitable matches. He paused. Lady Marin did not tell me she was doing this. I found out because she used my writing paper. Eliza stared at him. She says, Julian continued, with the careful tone of a man relaying information he finds both exasperating and deeply characteristic, that the matter is handled. Whatever that means. It means, Eliza said slowly, that Margaret has a place in Bath. It appears so. Since last week. She was quiet for a long moment. The field was brown and wide, and the sky above it was the pale gray of late January, and her sister was going to Bath, and Lady Marin had used Julian's writing paper, and she was standing in a frost-cleared field arguing about crop rotation with a duke. I will need to repay. You will not, he said. Julian. Lady Marin does not accept repayment. I have tried. For 30 years I have tried. He finally looked at her. Let her have it. She hasn't been this pleased with herself since 1809. Eliza pressed her lips together. She's impossible, she said. She's extraordinary, he said. And impossible. Both. Both, Eliza agreed. They stood at the edge of the field, and the cold was sharp and clean, and somewhere behind them the house stood solid against the gray sky, and it occurred to Eliza, not for the first time, but more clearly than before, that she was not managing anymore. She was somewhere else entirely. She wasn't quite sure what to call it yet. The letter from London arrived on a Friday. Julian brought it to find her, not sending a footman, coming himself, which Lady Marin noted from her window and said nothing about, which was its own kind of commentary. From my solicitor, he said. Regarding Fenwick. She took it. Read it. Fenwick had left England. Quietly, without announcement, on a packet boat to France. The timing suggested he had heard enough through enough channels to know that staying was no longer comfortable. He would not come back. She folded the letter and held it for a moment. She thought about the Harris girl in Scotland. About Susanna in Mrs. Dove's kitchen. About a corridor and a pen in her hand, and a picture painted wrong on a wall. Good, she said. Julian took the letter back. Good, he agreed. That evening, late, she was coming back from Lady Marin's room when she found Julian in the corridor outside the library. Not going in. Just standing at the door. She stopped. Are you going in? She asked. I was thinking about it, he said. It's raining, she said. He looked at her. It is, he said. You don't like the library in the rain, she said. Or so I was told. I find, he said slowly, that my feelings about the library in the rain have become more complicated recently. She considered this. I could come in, she said. If that would help. A pause. It would, he said. I think it would. She pushed open the door. The library was dark except for the fire, which someone had lit, the thoughtful footman who understood January, still at his post. The rain was steady on the windows. The shelves were exactly as they should be, the Herodotus in its correct chronological position, everything in its place. She sat in her chair. He sat in his. She picked up the book nearest to hand. He picked up his. The fire crackled. The rain came down. And the silence, as it always was between them, had no edges at all. The letter had been written 3 days after she left. Julian had not intended to send it. He had written it at 2 in the morning, which was when the house was quiet enough that his usual defenses, the estate, the decisions, the managed efficiency of everything, stopped working. He had written it the way he had told her about Thomas. Without meaning to. It just happened. He had left it on his desk. He had looked at it for 4 days. On the 5th day, Lady Manor had walked into his study without knocking. She never knocked. She considered knocking a formality for people who were less certain of their welcome, seen the letter, read the address on the front and said, "Julian. Send the letter." "It's not." "Send the letter." "It may not be appropriate to." "Send the letter or I will send it myself, and I will add a postscript." He had sent the letter. Eliza received it on a Wednesday, at the village school where she had been teaching for 11 days. She was good at it. She had discovered this with some surprise, not the teaching itself, which she had expected to manage, but the particular satisfaction of watching a child's face when something clicked into place. The moment the confusion resolved. She had not expected to love that moment as much as she did. The letter came with the afternoon post. The schoolmaster's wife brought it to her between lessons, looking curious, because the seal was unmistakable. Eliza put it in her apron pocket. She taught the rest of the afternoon. She read it that evening at the small desk in her small room, with the candle close and the window dark. It was not eloquent. Julian Ashworth was precise in correspondence. His business letters were models of clarity. His instructions to his solicitor were exact to the word. But this letter was none of those things. It started twice, the first beginning crossed out. It circled back on itself. There were words that had been written and then written over, not quite erased, visible underneath. It said, "I have been wrong in a way that I find difficult to account for, not because I do not understand how it happened. I understand exactly how it happened, and that is the worst part, but because I cannot explain how I chose a picture over a person who was standing directly in front of me telling me the truth. You told me once that your father built rooms he couldn't open. I have been thinking about that. I have a number of those rooms myself. The difference is that I thought I had opened mine. I thought 10 years of discipline and management had done away with the kind of blind assumption that allows a man to see what he has been arranged to see rather than what is actually there. I was wrong about that too. I am not writing to ask you to return. I have no right to ask. I am writing because I said I cannot verify that, and you left before I could take it back, and I have not been able to stop thinking about the window. I watched you walk down the drive. I stayed at the window until you were gone. I told myself I had done the correct thing. I did not believe it for a single moment. I don't know what I'm asking. I think I'm only asking you to know that." It was signed J. Ashworth. And then underneath in different ink as though added later, "You were right about the Herodotus." She read it 3 times. She put it in her apron pocket. She taught her class in the morning. She read it again at lunch, sitting on the wall outside the schoolroom with the February cold and the pale sun. She thought about the window. She thought about 3 pages and a seal, and a horse that had walked into a yard and made a decision. She thought about a corridor, and how am I doing, and the smile that changed his face entirely. She thought about Thomas's notebooks. She thought, I know what I want. The question is whether wanting it is enough. She had spent her whole life making do with less than she wanted because wanting was dangerous. Wanting cost things she couldn't afford. She had packed her feelings away in the drawer with the other things she didn't forget, and she had been practical, and she had been sensible, and she had been Eliza Vale who did not look back. She was tired of the drawer. She put the letter back in her pocket and went to teach her afternoon class. Lady Manor arrived on Thursday. Not a letter. Not a footman. Lady Manor herself, in the best Ashworth carriage, which pulled up outside the village schoolroom at 2:30, with a decisiveness that scattered the children in the yard and brought the schoolmaster to his window. Eliza came out to find the old woman already descending the carriage steps with the help of a long-suffering footman, dressed in her black silk, as though visiting a school in a February village was a formal occasion, which for Lady Manor it apparently was. "Lady Manor," Eliza said, "what are you doing here?" "I am collecting you," Lady Manor said, straightening her gloves. "Julian won't come himself. He thinks he doesn't deserve to. He has constructed an extremely elaborate argument about rights and propriety and what he has and has not earned, and it is all perfectly reasonable and completely wrong." "He wrote me a letter," Eliza said. "I know. I made him send it." "I know you did." Lady Manor looked at her with sharp, fond eyes. "Did you read it?" "3 times. And I'm a schoolteacher in a village 12 miles away," Eliza said. "I have a position. I have responsibilities. I can't simply—" "The schoolmaster has a cousin in Marlborough who has been looking for a position since October," Lady Manor said. "I wrote to him on Monday. He arrives next week." Eliza stared at her. "You are extraordinary," she said. "Yes," Lady Manor agreed. "Get your coat." "Lady Manor." "Eliza." The old woman's voice was gentle, suddenly, the warmth behind the drawn curtains. "He reads Thomas's notebooks every winter. Alone. He has done it since Waterloo. He went into the library in the rain. He stood at the window." She paused. "He wrote you a letter and he crossed out the beginning twice, and he added a postscript about Herodotus, because he ran out of courage and hid behind a joke, which is the most human thing I have seen him do in 10 years. Eliza was quiet. "Get your coat," Lady Manor said softly. "Come home." The word landed somewhere it had not been expected. Home. She had not had one since the vicarage. She had had rooms, serviceable, temporary, facing various gardens, and she had made them practical, and she had not let herself want more than practical. She went and got her coat. Julian was in his study when he heard the carriage. He was at his desk, correspondence, the endless correspondence, and he heard wheels on the gravel, and his head came up before he decided to move, which told him something about the state of things. He went to the window. The carriage was coming up the main drive. He watched it stop. He watched the footman open the door. He watched Lady Manor descend, and then, and his hand, without his permission, found the window frame, Eliza. She looked up. He was there at the window. She knew he would be. They looked at each other across the gravel and the frozen cherub and the raked perfect drive, and he thought, I stood at this window and I watched her leave, and I told myself I had done the correct thing. He was done doing the correct thing. He went downstairs. She was in the hall when he came down, not waiting exactly, just there, her coat still on, her bag in her hand, as though she hadn't quite committed to arriving. He came down the last few stairs and stopped. "You came," he said. "Lady Manor is very persuasive," she said. "She is," he agreed. "Are you, is it Lady Manor or—" "It's not Lady Manor," she said. He was quiet. "The letter," she said. "The bit about the window. I meant it." "I know you did." She set down her bag. "That's why I came." He looked at her. This woman who had walked 4 miles in indoor shoes and ridden back on his horse, and handed him 3 pages that changed everything, and stood in corridors and argued about crop rotation, and put the Herodotus back because she decided to, not because he'd told her to. I would like, he said carefully, to do this properly. Which means I am aware I have a great deal of ground to make up. The shoes alone. The shoes, she said. Yes. We'll come back to the shoes. We will absolutely come back to the shoes. From the landing above them, Lady Marin's voice descended with perfect clarity. Julian, if you don't ask her properly in the next 30 seconds, I am coming down there. We are in the middle of a conversation, he said, with great dignity to the ceiling. You are standing 4 feet apart, Lady Marin said. That is not a conversation. That is a gap. Eliza pressed her lips together very hard. She's not wrong, she said. He looked at her. Something shifted in his face, the last of the management falling away, all the controlled precision of 10 years of doing everything correctly, and what was underneath was just a man, fully, all at once. Stay, he said. Not as staff. Not as companion. Stay as the person who argues with me about Herodotus and crop rotation, and whether I am being unreasonable, which I am told you can identify without making a performance of it. A pause. Stay as the person I would like to spend a very long time being honest with. If you'll permit it. She looked at him for a moment that was long enough to matter. I permit it, she said. Above them, Lady Marin said, finally, with the satisfaction of a woman who had predicted this in the first week and would be mentioning it for the rest of her life. The engagement was announced in March. The ton divided as expected. The gossip columns were fascinated. There were opinions, many opinions, strongly held, generously shared, about the wisdom of a duke marrying a vicar's daughter with 11 shillings and no connections and a mother in the country. Julian read none of it. He had better things to do. Margaret arrived from Bath in April, brought up in Lady Marin's carriage, and spent 3 days at Ashworth Manor being looked at by everyone, and looking back with Eliza's same steady eyes and the same quality of noticing things without announcing that she was doing it. On the 3rd day, Julian found her in the library. She was standing at the shelves, reading the spines, and she turned when he came in with an expression that was so entirely like her sister's that he stopped. The Herodotus, she said. 2nd shelf. Far left. Yes, he said carefully. She told me about it, Margaret said. In her letter. She said, he knows where everything is and he was right about where it belonged, and I put it back because I decided to. A pause. She also said you added a postscript about it in your letter because you ran out of courage. She told you that. She tells me everything, Margaret said cheerfully. Always has. She pulled out a book and looked at the cover. She's happy. I wanted you to know I can tell. Julian was quiet for a moment. So can I, he said. Margaret nodded, satisfied, and took her book to the chair by the window, Eliza's chair, and opened it. He left her to it. The wedding was in June. The morning room was full of flowers. Lady Marin wore a new dress, dark green, which was as close to festive as she was prepared to go, and she sat in the front row with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes very bright, and she did not cry, because she had predicted this from the first week, and there was nothing to cry about when you were right. Mrs. Dove came from the village in her Sunday coat. She sat near the back and smiled at everything. Eliza walked in wearing a dress the color of winter light, not white. She had said, white was for girls who had never had to be practical. And she did not look at anyone except Julian, who was standing at the front of the room looking at her with an expression that was entirely unhidden, that had no management in it at all, that was just present. She reached him. "You're on time," he said quietly. "I'm always on time," she said. "You are," he agreed. "It's one of many things Julian," she said. "Yes. We're in a church." "I'm aware." "Say it after." He looked at her, and there was the smile, the real one, the one that changed his face entirely, and he said, "After." Afterward in the carriage, he said it. All of it. Without the crossing out. Without the postscript about Herodotus to hide behind at the end. She listened. Then she said, "I know." "You know." "I've known," she said, "since the library. Since the rain. I just needed you to know that you knew." He looked at her for a long moment. "That is either very wise," he said, "or very exasperating." "It's mostly just practical," she said. He laughed. Actually laughed, and she stored it away. Not in the drawer, not with the other things, but somewhere newer, somewhere that was not about surviving but about keeping. They said she had married above herself. In London, they said it over dinner tables and in drawing rooms, and in the gossip columns that Julian still did not read. They said it with raised eyebrows and knowing smiles, and the particular satisfaction of people who feel that the natural order of things has been disrupted and must be commented upon. Eliza read one of the columns, just once, because she was practical and preferred to know what was being said, and she set it down, and she went to find Julian in the library. He was at his desk. He looked up. "They say I married above myself," she said. "I know," he said. "I've been told." "What do you think?" He looked at her, this man who had spent 10 years rebuilding something worth leaving behind, who read his brother's notebooks every winter, who had stood at a window long after she was gone. "I think," he said, "that it was entirely the other way around." She sat in her chair. He went back to his correspondence. The fire crackled. Outside, the summer had come to the rose garden at last, proper summer. The roses finally doing what roses were meant to do, red and white and alive, and the grounds were warm and green and entirely themselves. The Herodotus was on the second shelf, far left, exactly where it belonged. 6 months after the wedding, the Duchess of Marath was seen walking the East Field in boots that cost more than most people in the county earned in a month. The Duke had them made. He had said nothing about why. She had said nothing about why she knew. They had simply appeared in her room one morning, wrapped in brown paper, no note, which was, she had come to understand, exactly how Julian expressed the things he found difficult to say out loud. She wore them every day. Margaret wrote from Bath in September. She had met someone, a solicitor's son, she said, which was not a duke and not a fortune but was kind and steady and made her laugh, and she wanted Eliza to know before she told anyone else. She wrote 4 pages about him, which told Eliza everything she needed to know about the state of things. Eliza wrote back the same day. "He sounds exactly right," she wrote. Not despite the 4 pages. Because of them. Lady Marin, informed of the development, said, "Good. A solicitor's son is sensible. Margaret has more sense than she looks." "She looks very sensible," Eliza said. "She has your eyes," Lady Marin said. "I meant it as a compliment." Lord Fenwick did not return from France. Word reached Ashworth in October, through the same quiet channels that Julian used for quiet things, that he had settled in Paris, where his history was not yet known and his charm was still operational. Julian received the information, noted it, and passed it to the man in London whose particular skill was making things known in the right rooms. Paris had drawing rooms too. Caroline married a German baron in November. His name was difficult to pronounce, and his fortune was considerable, and his conversation was, by all accounts, limited to horses and the management of his estates, which were extensive and flat. She sent no wedding announcement to Ashworth. Lady Marin sent no gift. Neither of them mentioned it. The thing that Eliza had not expected, had not let herself expect, in the months of practical thinking and careful not wanting, was the quiet of it. Not the grand gestures. Not the moment in the corridor or the letter or the horse on the drive. Those had been necessary, and she was grateful for them, but they were not the thing she held on to. The thing she held on to was the library on a Tuesday evening with the fire going and Julian at his desk and her in her chair, and the silence between them that had no edges, and the feeling, not dramatic, not earned through suffering, just steady and true, of being exactly where she was supposed to be. She had spent so long arriving somewhere, managing toward something, holding herself together through the cold and the frost and the drawer full of things she didn't forget. She had not known what it felt like when the arriving was done. It felt like this. In December, Julian came to find her in the library. She was reading the Geological Formations book, which had been restored to her possession via Lady Marin, who had restored it via Mrs. Hobbs, who had retrieved it from the desk in the small room where Eliza had left it on the morning she packed, which was either extremely organized household management or the most elaborate apology for a book that had ever been mounted. She looked up. He was standing in the doorway with his coat on and his hat in his hand. "Come outside," he said. "It's December," she said. "I know. It's cold. I know. Come outside." She put down the book and came outside. The first snow of winter had started while she was reading, softly, unhurriedly, the way the best things arrive. It lay thin and new on the gravel, on the rose garden, on the frozen cherub in the fountain who was still trapped mid-pour with nothing coming out, same as ever, patient as stone. Julian was standing on the front steps looking at it. She stood beside him. "I used to hate winter," he said. "I know," she said. "You told me." It was the quiet of it. Everything shut down. Nowhere to put he paused, choosing the word, the thinking. She waited. "It's different now," he said. Simply, as though reporting a fact, which she had learned was how he said the things that mattered most. She looked at the snow on the gravel, at the cherub, at the long drive raked perfect, white now, not a footprint in it yet. She thought about a January morning and a bag and cold feet and 4 miles of frost. She thought about a door she had not looked back at. She thought about a horse walking into a yard with the calm certainty of something that had already decided. "Julian," she said. "Yes." "You know the drawer." She had told him about the drawer one evening late in the library when the fire had been going long enough to make honesty easy. "The one for things I don't forget." "I know the drawer," he said. "I've been moving things out of it," she said. "Since June. Bit by bit." He turned to look at her. "Where are you putting them?" he asked. She considered. "Somewhere else. Somewhere that isn't about surviving." He was quiet for a moment, looking at her face in the thin winter light, the snow coming down soft and unhurried between them. Then he took her hand, not dramatically, not with ceremony, just took it, the way he did things when he had decided. And they stood on the front steps of Ashworth Manor in the first snow of December and looked at the white drive and the frozen garden and the cherub who had been waiting all this time, patient as stone, for something to finally come out. She thought, I walked up this drive in January with cold feet, and a letter of introduction, and no choices left. She thought, and then I had all of them. Inside, in her chair by the library fire, Lady Manor turned a page of her book. She did not look out the window. She didn't need to. She had predicted all of it from the first week, from the first conversation, from the moment Eliza Vale had said, I can't promise what your response will be, and Lady Manor had thought, there she is. She had known. She turned another page. Outside, the snow fell on the raked gravel, and the frozen cherub, and the two people standing on the front steps, and the grounds of Ashworth Manor were white and still and entirely at peace. The Herodotus was on the second shelf, far left. Everything was exactly where it belonged. They said she married above herself. She always thought it was the other way around. Thank you for staying with the story until the very end. If you enjoyed it, feel free to share your thoughts, and let us know which city you're watching from. Your comments help shape what comes next. If you'd like more stories like this, you can subscribe to the channel.